right now. Let's dive into this brand new book. It's called Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay by Todd Zolecki, of course, who covered the Phillies for a long time, Phillies.com, and reveals the real Roy Halladay with over, hundreds of interviews in this book, which talks to his wife and former teammates and guys like Cole Hamels, Jason Worth, Raul Ibanez, Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley, Ryan Howard, and many, many others. And he's going to join us now to give us a little insight on the book. It is Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay, and we'll tell you more about it right now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as Todd Zolecki of Phillies.com joins us here on the Sports Baz. Zoe, what's happening, pal?
Hey, Mike, how are you doing, man?
All is well. Hope you're staying safe, man. And obviously, this book is at a time where baseball is not available to us, so it obviously is well-timed to get out for people. But it's a very interesting guy. I mean, Halladay, when he was here, was this almost mythical figure. And now we're seeing in his life afterwards that there was a lot going on. So I want to start with, did you have, I don't want to say unanimous, but when you asked coaches, teammates, friends, family about him, did you get a near unanimous type of opinion of what kind of man he was?
I really did, and that is something that really stuck out to me throughout the interview process. I talked to, like you said, I talked to over 100 people for the book, and everybody still speaks with great admiration, love for him, regardless of what happened the day he died and the aftermath of it and, what might have preceded it. He impacted a lot of people in a lot of positive ways. And, I talked with people that only spent a year or two with him and, got choked up talking about their experience with him because it meant that much to them. And, that was something, again, that really stuck out to me as I talked to people. Like, all the other stuff, they still look at Roy Halladay as a positive influence on their lives and something that and the time that they spent together, they still cherish to this day.
Now, Todd, a lot of times we hear about someone like an Andy Reid, who when he talked to the media, he was a stoic guy. But behind closed doors, apparently he was very jolly and very, jovial. Was that the way Doc was? Because obviously to you guys, he was very stoic. But was he a different guy behind closed doors to his teammates?
He was a little bit different. He was a little bit more open. He would fly, model airplanes at the ballpark. He would fly model helicopters in the clubhouse and have fun with those types of things. But what made Roy great is that, he never really stopped working. He was always preparing for the next start. So in a sense, even though, he would have conversations and love to talk baseball with his teammates, he was very single-minded and of purpose while he was pitching, So he had his workout days, and people knew not to get in his way, and they knew, hey, you're not going to be able to get Roy Halladay into a card game playing because he's going to have a couple iPads on the tray tables in front of him, and he's going to be studying film of the hitters that he's going to face in his next start. I mean, those are things that people just knew and they respected.
Todd Zolecki, the book is called Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get books, you can get it out there, and make sure you really dive into this thing because it goes back. And I want to kind of start with him on the field in terms of his struggles. I mean, this is a guy that in Philly, the end he struggled, but he was one of the most dominant guys when he came here from his time in Toronto. But people might not remember when he was in Toronto, he didn't just jump into the league and was in the Cy Young race.
Yeah, no. So it was interesting because he was a first-round draft pick. He almost threw a no-hitter in his second big league start in '98, and then he started to struggle. But he really struggled in 2000. He had a 10.64 ERA, and you hear that and you go, wow, that's pretty bad. But to this day, it is the single-season highest ERA in baseball history of any pitcher that's ever thrown 50 or more innings in a season. And then of course now you hear that you go, wow, that's awful. But then you say, Hall of Famers never are that bad. They're never that bad. I mean, I looked at all the pitchers that were underneath Roy Halladay in those rankings, the highest ERA rankings, and most of those people are people that you've never heard of before, or they're journeymen that you heard of, and you're like, oh, man, I remember him. He stunk. But, the next Hall of Famer under that list is like mid-sixes, Lefty Grove in like 1930s. In other words, again, like Hall of Fame pitchers don't struggle the way that Roy Halladay struggled early in his career. They sent him down to A-ball after spending a couple seasons in the big leagues, and then he basically resurrected his entire career by working on the mental side of the game and on the physical side of the game.
Very interesting because people, don't realize that whole beginning that he struggled. And then once he's in Toronto and he obviously becomes one of the best pitchers, he wins a Cy Young, and then he gets traded to Philly. When he came here, what do you remember about maybe first impression of what this guy was like and what he brought? He wasn't able to win a World Series here, but it seemed that he brought something with Phillies, found that they had to go after this guy even after they had won a World Series.
Yeah, because he was a larger-than-life figure. And the only way I can explain it is early in my journalism career, I worked in Chicago, and the first player I was ever kind of awestruck by was I saw Michael Jordan. I covered a Bulls practice one day, and they raised up this curtain, and Michael Jordan was shooting free throws about 10 feet away from me. I was like, wow, that's Michael Jordan. And so now flash forward to spring training 2010, and I've covered a Phillies World Series and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley and Ryan Howard and all these guys. But that first day you saw Roy Halladay in that Phillies clubhouse in Clearwater, you were like, whoa, that's Roy Halladay. And he's in the Phillies clubhouse right now. This is pretty amazing. I mean, he had an aura about him, and I think that was a big reason why the former Phillies GM Ruben Amaro Jr. wanted him so badly, is because he knew that this guy would do anything it took to win, and he knew that if he could get him, he would have the best pitcher in baseball. And for those first 2 years, arguably he was the best pitcher in baseball.
What do we think happened after those first 2 years? I mean, was it complete burnout? I mean, was there injuries that he just couldn't overcome? It's so weird that his career started on a bumpy path and then ended and he just kind of went away. It was like, you know what? I'm not the same guy and I'm out.
Yeah. So, I learned something in this book and talking to Roy's wife. And remember Game 5 of the 2011 NLDS when he pitched against his best friend Chris Carpenter. Roy actually felt a pop in his back during that start, and he ended up finishing the game strong. He pitched, allowed 1 run in the first inning, and then 7 scoreless after that. He came to camp the following spring, the spring of 2012, and something just wasn't right. His velocity was down, his mechanics were off. Well, that season, he talked a lot about, it's my shoulder. They put him on the DL because of a shoulder injury. But the reality is that his back was in really bad shape. He had, and it kind of ironically, all the running, all the weight training made him the pitcher that he was, but it also basically wrecked his back. He had fractures in his back. The discs in his back had eroded. And so in 2012, he was struggling with that, but he still thought he could overcome it. He started taking painkillers to try to kind of get through the pain. That developed into an addiction. And then in 2013, his last year in the big leagues, he really struggled. He had shoulder surgery again, hoping that maybe he could kind of grind through it. But in the end, the back pain, it was really debilitating back pain. It wasn't like a nagging back injury. It was a real serious back injury. He just couldn't overcome it.
Todd Zolecki, Phillies.com, is the author of the book, Roy Halladay. And obviously, it's described in the book, he's a quiet enigma, a man who worked harder than anyone and let his pitches do the talking. The life that he led after baseball, was that a surprise to his teammates, or did they kind of know that he was kind of a quirky guy?
Yeah, I think in terms of his post career, he changed a little bit. Like he let down his guard a little bit. You saw some of the things that he was doing on Twitter. He was showing a little bit more personality. What I thought was fascinating as I got into the book was, you think about how much money he made in his career, how successful he was, Hall of Fame pitcher, right? And what do most of those guys do now? They just play a lot of golf, they do a lot of fishing, do a lot of traveling. They become like a club ambassador where they play some golf with some high-level clients. They might become a broadcaster. But Roy Halladay, the mentor, is so important to him on the field and off the field that he started a second career as a mental skills coach for the Phillies on the minor league side. and it was like a real serious deal to him. Like he had office hours, he called, texted players, emailed players, checked in on players. I think because he struggled so much mentally throughout his life, I think he knew that he could maybe provide some help to some people that were struggling as well. And I think he knew that might be beneficial. So it's tragic that, the way he died, and it's people, they feel that he had a lot more to offer, and he could have been like a real special, had an equally Hall of Fame post-career off the field as he had on the field.
How much of this, his after, baseball career maybe is tied back to his growing up? I mean, is there a look back? I know that's like a deep thing to look at, but did you talk to people going back to his childhood that wondered, man, the way he was brought up kind of led him down this weird path?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's related. Think about like anything that happened to you when you grew up, and some certain things that happen to you when you're a kid, the way you're raised or whatever, that it has an impact on you. And Roy's dad really worked him hard as a kid, really pushed him hard. It was kind of glorified in the past in his career. He threw his dad built him a pitching mound in his basement, and he threw bullpen sessions, and he built him a batting cage, and he took batting practice and all that stuff. But there was a lot of pressure on Roy. He one of his earliest memories was being yelled at on a little league field. Those types of things affected him, and I think he carried that with him throughout his entire life. He always felt the need to please people. He had confidence issues, he had anxiety issues, and I think that again, he carried that with him for the real about it is on one hand, maybe without that hard push from his father, he doesn't have the career he did, but on the other hand, what was the ultimate cost? And one other thing about that is, after his career was over, he coached his boys, and he made a very conscious choice to coach his sons differently. He did not pressure them like he was when he was a kid. When he coached other teams, when he coached their teams, he made parents sign contracts, almost like a behavior contract. If you yell at your kid on the field, if you yell at me, if you do not act like a parent, you are not going to be allowed to come to your son's games. And if you don't follow that order, your son is not going to play. So again, because that affected him so much as a kid, he didn't want other kids to kind of go through those same feelings, because I think he carried those feelings with him for his entire life.
Todd Zolecki is with us, author of the book, Doc, The Life of Roy. You talk to so many people, but I'm interested in a random guy, like Greg Zaun, a catcher. Like, what were some of the catchers' relationships with Halladay? I always find the pitcher-catcher relationship to be interesting, and if they felt intimidated by him or that they felt he was easy to work with.
That was actually one of the more fun chapters I got to write, because I talked to as many catchers as I could for the book. And, a guy like Greg Zaun, who caught him in Toronto, Brian Schneider with the Phillies, some of these names that you probably never heard of, Ken Huckabee, Tom Wilson, Kevin Cash, who's now the Rays manager. I talked to a lot of these guys that caught him, and it was really interesting to see kind of what he was like coming up. As he came up, he was kind of quiet and reserved, and they would have their pregame meeting, and the pitching coach and the catcher would kind of go over things, and Roy would be quiet. But then as Roy got more established and he did more studying, he ran the meeting, and he was very strict. I mean, there were times when catcher said, the first time I ever came out to the mound to talk to Roy, he basically said, like, what are you doing up here? Get off the mound. And it was funny, because you talk to one catcher, Mike, and you go like, okay, well, that's a funny story, but maybe that happened. It probably happened, but maybe not quite like that. But when you have 3 or 4 other catchers tell you the same exact story, like, yeah, the first time I ever went to the mound, he told me to get the heck off the mound and get back behind home plate. You're like, wow, this is what he was really like. He would tell catchers before games, let's throw cutters in, I'll throw cutters away. I'm not going sinker in. And so now think it's the 7th inning, you're 90 pitches in, and the hitter's up, and you kind of forget and you call a sinker in. Well, Roy would step off the mound and kind of give that catcher the death stare, like, I literally told you this 4 hours ago. I'm not going sinker into this guy. What are you doing? And the catcher would be like, oh my God, I forgot. I'm so sorry. And then, so there a lot of those moments. But again, even for those catchers that were told to get off the mound, even those catchers that felt pressure catching him, they still talk about him with so much admiration, and quite honestly, it's one of the highlights of their career. They all say the same thing. These guys that you've never heard of, like, that was one of the, I treasure my time I got to catch Roy Halladay, because he was that good, and it just made me feel like I was king of the world when he pitched well.
So I'll leave you with this. Obviously, the Philly fans in our audience will wonder, was there a Philly? Was there a guy that felt a connection more with Roy that you talked to? I mean, you talked to Halladay, Rollins, Utley, Ibanez, Howard. I mean, obviously the biggest of big, but was there someone that you talked to within the Phillies organization that had that special connection with him?
I think, well, Cole Hamels, I talked with Cole, and Cole really, really loves Roy and really holds that relationship. And he talks about how he tries to keep him in his mind when he goes out and pitches. But I thought one of the coolest stories I heard was from Jason Worth. And Jason said, I just loved catching behind Roy because it was a different feeling than any other pitcher. He's like, it's like, let's be honest, you play 160 games a season. Sometimes you're kind of going through the motions. You're not totally locked in. You have some pitchers like Cliff Lee who before the game, 20 minutes before the game, is throwing wads of paper in a trash can for $100, a shot. You know what I mean? And you're going, wow, Cliff is pitching today? He's pretty chill. But he's like, as soon as Roy walked into the clubhouse that day, it was like, ooh, Roy Halladay's pitching today. Okay, it's game on, man. It is game on, and he played with an edge, and I think that was something that he loved about Roy, and what a lot of these guys loved about Roy.
The book is called Doc, The Life of Roy Halladay, Todd Zolecki, and it's a great book. You can check it out, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, wherever you guys go out there and get books, and make sure 23 chapters in all, and it covers a whole heck of a lot. We just scratched the surface, and we appreciate Todd jumping on board here to talk more about the book. Congrats on the book, Todd. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate it. Take care.
Man, Todd Zolecki, longtime Phillies beat writer here on the Sports Bash.